Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. My name is Rihanna, and I am your host for today for Black Mental Health Matters, which is a show that supports with education, awareness, and understanding of the very issues that affect the Black communities worldwide. Stay tuned. We are going to be having two very special guests with us today discussing how we as a community can re-image mental health for the Black community in regards to the resources and services that we access. So stay tuned and I will introduce our guests very, very soon. So our first guest I'm going to introduce to you is Marcia. And Marcia is a diversity, inclusion, and equality specialist. She has had over 30 years of experience within coaching, mentoring, and within the field of training and facilitation. She is an ex-police officer and has supported many of her colleagues throughout her years of service. So I'm going to bring Marcia into the picture. So, Marcia, welcome.
Hi,
Hello, hello, hello. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, good, good. Wonderful. So I know I just gave a very, very brief overview of who you are, but please, please, please do introduce yourself to our viewers today.
Yes, thanks for the invitation. So I'm Marcia Orr. I call myself a Brummie from living in Southampton. My background, as you said, is I was a police officer for 30 years. I joined following the Scarman report, asking for a more representative police service. And I did a number of operational and non-operational roles, including ethnic minority recruitment officer. I was vice chair of West Midlands Black and Asian Police Association. I'm the executive of the National Black Police Association and executive member of the British Association of Women in Policing, and also Women's Sergeants Federation rep. I retired in 2012, and I've done various jobs working in the charity sector, working in the utilities. I worked for a non-governmental body, and my last job was of head of ED&I in a facilities management business. I'm now working freelance for myself, working when I want to, where I want to, with who I want to. So yeah, I'm enjoying life.
Amazing. That's the dream, right?
Yeah, that's the dream.
Thank you. Thank you. And welcome. I'm very pleased to have you here. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So I'm going to introduce our next guest. This is Naomi Elliot, and she is a transformational consultant and considers herself a metaphysical parapsychologist. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but I'm going to bring her on so she can explain exactly what that means and how this incorporates into the show today. Naomi, welcome, welcome, welcome to the stage. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you very much.
Wonderful. So again, I know I gave a snippet of who you are, but please grace the viewers with your wonderful awe and tell them who exactly you are.
Yeah, so I always like to start by introducing myself as I'm very multidimensional and cannot be put in a box. But my title of a metaphysical parapsychologist came through my own personal experiences of understanding how spirituality and science meet, and how spiritual experiences are actually more real than what has been understood. So, what I do is I do a lot of work in normalizing mystical and spiritual experiences in everyday life. And my experience of this came through an unlawful detainment that happened in the mental health system whilst I was actually a practitioner. But because of the understanding around spirituality and how that's expressed in different ethnic cultures, that can be quite restricting and limiting. So I've made it my mission to bring more awareness and to bring some changes within this world, just to accept people who are maybe a bit more different to you. And also seeing how spirituality connects with neurodiversity as well, because that was also something that connected with my experience. So, yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Ooh. So you can see, viewers, that this is going to be a very, very interesting show. And I'm not even going to delay. I'm just going to jump right in with the first question, because the knowledge and wealth that we've got here is just gonna, yeah, it's sweet, sweet, sweet. So my first question, and feel free, whoever wants to jump in on this, feel free to jump in. But I was doing a bit of research in preparation for this show, and some of the things that I came across was a blog by the NHS benchmarking report, and it found that 89% of care is provided in the community. That's mental health care. But yet community services only have 62% of the workforce, and only 54% of the money is allocated to mental health services. Now, I know I just threw out some stats, but in all honesty, what's your thoughts on what I just said?
I'll jump in, and I'll
Please
jump
do.
in because my background is my mom was a psychiatric nurse, and so in my formative years, and my teens, and I did some work experience in her psychiatric unit. I've been around that as well as in my professional life, and I think one of the stark things why you could see this being a time bomb going back to the 1990s, when we had the whole care in the community, where they emptied psychiatric hospitals, put people back into the community who hadn't lived there for decades without any care, any support at all. Is it any wonder that things have got to the state they have since that happened? People were cared for. Some people have been institutionalized. I remember being with my mom, and there was an older lady there, and she'd been there for decades because she was an unmarried mother, and that's what they did with unmarried mothers. They took the children and they put them in mental institutions. So what do you do with someone who that's been their life? You know, they don't know how to care for themselves, but we just go, oh, we'll empty the hospitals, we'll give some support, we'll give them the medication, we'll sell off the hospitals, they'll become hotels, restaurants, knock them down, we'll build some housing, but not even thinking long term what we're doing, and also not preparing communities and educating communities to be able to support and adjust to having people with mental health issues in the community that they've not been known of before.
Yeah, I can completely agree with what you said, and it brings about a term that we use in mental health: bed blocking. You know, when someone is inevitably in hospital and they are ready for discharge, but they're there longer than they need to be. They consider that they're bed blocking, and that space could be used for someone else that is potentially in need. But sometimes people are pushed out.
It's actually an offensive term because it sounds like people are squatting deliberately.
Exactly.
Who wants to be in a hospital, not in being in your own home, unless you've got nowhere else to go? It's not a relaxing place to be, having been in hospital twice to give birth, in, out, and once when I was ill. It's not a relaxing place. It's a treatment place. It's not somewhere that you chill. It's not a spa. So bed blocking is an outrageous term to use, I always think.
I agree. Naomi, do you want to chime in on this? What's your thoughts on the stats I was explaining earlier about the workforce and the actual money allocated to mental health community services?
My initial thoughts would be it's and this has been my recurring thoughts particularly over the last few months of, okay, when we see stats like this, you can only ask the question, is a crisis being created as opposed to there actually being a crisis? Because there, like, common sense would tell you, you know, create ways to where people can have the support, because if you don't, it's exactly the same way in the prison system. If you don't create those support measures, they end up coming back and being I've lost the word,
Readmitted
and going through that whole recriminalization process. So it's I just sit here dumbfounded, like, okay, why can we not just, you know, look at things in a very simplistic way? Like, my thing is, if we could understand that even just in support may look like teaching people how to regulate themselves on the most basic levels, that can take off so much weight out of and pressure off of the mental health system, because you're empowering people to care for themselves. And that's where people, in fact, we see this trend even with self-help, and how people are going more into self-help practices and wanting to do things for themselves, equip people to empower themselves to feel like they can do what needs to be done. But for me, it just seems like a very simple answer, but we're just here. So it just takes, and I'm, you know, there are some changes that are happening, but there's a lot more that has to be done, and there's a lot more that could, I think the way that the system is right now, it's hard to fully create that pathway to change when there's still these little systematic blockages that are taking place, that almost creates a type of gaslighting for the patient. Because how can you, just like as you mentioned the whole terminology with bedlocking, how can you tell me that I'm bedlocking and you haven't provided the solutions that can allow me to not do that, but then you blame me when that happens? So yeah, it's just a very confusing situation for me.
Yeah, and I can understand that. Even people that are going through like severe mental and emotional distress at that time, even if they are at a point where they are well enough to re-enter the community, how difficult it must be for them knowing that the support isn't there. And even the way that the system is structured, it's only if you're on a certain section you get certain support, you know. So what about the other people that come in and out, like the revolving door? How are those people supported within the community if there's no specific quote unquote funding for them or specific services for them if they don't meet certain criteria? And that's where I think a lot of the issue is in regards to the over over analysis of criteria, and meeting referral quotas is part of the issue there for me.
Yeah, but it's also, sorry, Naomi, I was going to say, for me, there's lots of things that link in. So we have NHS that is in crisis.
Yeah.
We don't have enough staff to meet demand. So if you have a process that can manage that, manage the flow, then it doesn't make the lack of resources look so bad, and you look like you're doing something because you've got all these metrics and all these different avenues that people can access it in if they can understand the complication of the system, especially when you're in having a mental health crisis. And you know, there's one thing, any of us can have mental ill health. I have had periods of depression myself. Any of us, it can happen to have at any time whatsoever. But we still, in this day and age, we still have a stigma where mental health is concerned. I know they say we talk about it, sort of. Whereas before, if you were mentally ill, we locked you away and forgot about you, or we gave you convulsive treatment, electric shock, when we know, you know, so
electroconvulsive therapy
and stuff like that. So I'm not sure, and I'm not a clinician, I don't know. Instead of treating people how to manage their condition and live with their condition, we try and blast it with all sorts of stuff to cure it, as opposed to managing it.
Yeah, the plaster, I call it. Rather than getting to the root cause, you're just trying to put a plaster on it. And I'm sure we're going to delve into that more as the show goes on and in future shows to come, in all honesty. Okay, so that leads me kind of nicely into the next question, because a lot of the time mental health services go through this very rigorous commissioning process, and I've noticed that there's been a shift towards more community-based services where the culturally competence aspect of professionalism is being referred to more in a lot of the commissioning services, commissioning tenders. So my next question is, how can this shift be done properly to actually meet the needs of our community? And in your current professions, in your opinion, how can this be done safely and equitably? And this is going to be to Naomi.
Can you just repeat the question again so I can piece it all together?
Yeah, so basically there's been a shift towards more culturally competent services where like local services are being commissioned for the cultural competency to support communities like ours. And my question is mainly, how can this be done safely and equitably? So making sure we all can benefit from these shifts.
I would say that allowing the service users to direct some of the policies, because they are the ones. What is the nature of this service, and how is it impacting the patients? How is it impacting service users? For myself, this is going through an unlawful detainment. My question is, where is there any internal filtering systems that allow people to address their own personal prejudices before they go and diagnose a patient? Because
That's
for
a very
me,
real question.
I'm now being stigmatized and demonized by someone who already has a perceived conception of who they think I am and what they think I have, when it's actually the complete opposite. So they need to start listening to a diverse set of service users, those that have been unlawfully detained, those that haven't been detained, and those that have been detained. Have a perspective of everyone, because outside you still got family dealing with service users. You still got, you know, parents, partners, children. Do you know how many times people are coerced within their detainments and you know, use their children as a form of a reward system, right? As to, you know, if you be good, then you can get to see your children. Now, what impact is that having on the children? What impact is that having on the family? Like, we don't really consider all of the knock-on effects that do take place. So I think there has to be a more honest conversation with service users, and the removal of this, like, this is why this was actually the point I was going to bring up earlier, because it's the issue is actually the way that the system's already structured. If you create a system for detainment, there's no space for rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Because all you're doing is detaining, all you're doing is restraining, all you're doing is, and that's a very aggressive approach to people that you're supposed to be caring for. So ask service users, do I feel cared for? Do I feel like I'm going into these spaces and feeling like I come out rejuvenated? Like I feel refreshed. I feel like I've got a much better understanding of myself and my mental health and how to move forward. That I'm not going to just relapse back into the same cycle because I wasn't given what I should have been given to begin with. So yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Marcia, do you have anything to add to that? Thank you, Naomi.
There's a challenge with that. And ideally, that would be great. But we've got a system that's been set up based on power and privilege and expertise or knowledge, academic, but not. I totally agree with what Naomi says about actually getting the perspective of the service users about what's appropriate for them and what works for them. And people, as we know, don't like to give up power. We have systems that like to tell people how to live their lives with little or no input from them at all. So to make the changes, it's a really systemic change. It's about educating service users on how to advocate for themselves, their families and their support system on how to advocate for them, and getting professionals in the field to actually say, okay, then from your clinical perspective, that sounds great, but actually, how is it for the experience of those on the receiving end? And I'm not sure whether there is that open dialogue when an assessment is being made, for example, even if someone isn't in a position because of their mental incapacity, there sometimes becomes a point where they become more lucid, that you can have those conversations with them about their care. We need to be able to give people the tools and educate them to be able to manage their conditions when it comes to mental health, because I'm not sure you can cure it. It's a bit like once you've had whiplash, you've always got a weak spot. It's about identifying what your triggers are when your weak spot's going to play up before it becomes full blown, and you need to have a neck brace because your neck's hurting because you've ignored it. And that would, the benefits for the individual, but for the families, for the community, and for the NHS in alleviating those pressures would be, I think, significant. But that would require a systemic step back. Let's really critically look at what we're doing, because we keep doing slightly different things, but it's not working. So really engaging with those who are at the receiving end of the service. Because after all, if you're a customer and you're not happy with the service, you have a voice. There's avenues where you can raise your concerns and all the rest of it. Where it comes to health, it's more difficult. When it comes to mental health, because of that impairment, you're already deemed as not being able to make decisions for yourself, and that lingers, regardless of whether you're well or not.
I
as well, it's even just to speak off the back of the what you mentioned about the powers, and I think, yeah, that's literally the foundational part of the problem, because if you create a hierarchical system in care, and when I say hierarchical in a sense of um you know uh this, you have a professional who can now create a diagnosis or pathology that could potentially damage that person's life, but the there's no power to challenge it, number one. And even within that challenging, like the foundational system just is is designed to not allow the patient to have power. So for example,
Mm,
a doctor can have an opinion,
mm-hmm,
a perspective of what condition that he thinks or she thinks that you have, to override that. In fact, you can't even cancel the opinion, you can't remove a diagnosis. All you can do is update an opinion
mm-hmm.
that someone has already made. So a second opinions are not even new diagnoses. They're just people confirming opinions, but no one can challenge the opinion. And what do we say about opinions? I just have to see things in a very foundational level, right? We were just totally out of the box when it comes to this system, but
Mm,
that's very relevant
yeah,
because number one, and I think this also is how this translates as a problem across the board, because we're forgetting that some of these professionals also deal with the same thing.
mm,
But there's not a there's when there's no humanization
mm,
of that process across the board, and that impacts both the patient and even the professional. So there's just a wider conversation to have about the powers and how that really does impact. Like I said, if I'm someone who's receiving care and there's someone who's dominating themselves over me, that's classified as abuse.
yeah,
But
yeah.
we don't take account for things like that when it comes to the system. So
Yeah. And I know we've spoken a lot outside of this show, but we've spoken a lot about medical gaslighting and the hoops people have to jump through to even have their case seen and heard. And even down to gaslighting being a new term within, Western vocabulary, but it now only having recognition within courts. So this is how I see um, the shift for people to be held accountable, that, for example, where you mentioned about second opinion, legally, doctors don't have to give a second opinion. Well, in the UK, I say, they don't have to, they're not obliged to, it's not a legal obligation to give a second opinion. So overriding a professional judgment or a professional opinion, like you said, it's just about updating it. And a lot of the time, other doctors don't discredit other doctors because that's their clique. To put it simply, that's their clique. And who wants to be the person that discredited another professional to then, have to go through that whole process of explaining why and all of these other things. But I just find it interesting that I see it time and time again where people can go abroad and see another doctor, have another opinion, and have a completely different outcome. But that person that they've seen may have the cultural tools to understand that person's condition in a totally different light. And that makes all the world of difference for that individual in itself. Not only that they're believed by someone else, that there is hope with other conditions. And when it comes down to how this information is relayed to patients or people exiting the mental health services, they have some form of hope in regards to aftercare, touching back on what Marcia said before about care in the community. What that actually looks like, what that sounds like, what that feels like for them, it's tangible. I don't understand why there is so much ring fencing in respect of how diagnosis, assessment, and support is provided. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to move on to the next question, because my new motto is for us, by us, commission us. And the reason why I think that is because a lot of the time we are our healers. We know what we need. We know what's best for us. And I just want to get your thoughts on that statement. For us, by us, commission us. And I'm going to throw this out to Marcia first.
It's a great saying, right? I come back to something I probably touched on before. We need to be educated enough to understand the system. It's a bit like, my analogy would be, if you've got no family that's ever been to university, you don't understand the system. You don't know how to write a personal statement. You don't know how it works. Whereas some people, their family have been through that, and therefore they can pass that down and add that support. So people need to be educated and need to be able to understand how to access the system and how it works. And one of the challenges with that is the system is communicated using medical terminology. Sometimes that you need to go and Google. Thank God for Google now, but or find a medical dictionary or something. Nick, my mom's nursing books that she used to have with drugs and that, to find out what it is they're talking about. So how if you don't understand the system, how can you benefit you? Because that's a block in itself in terms to the language and the complication that and the hurdles and hoops you have to go through. First of all, linking back to points made earlier about diagnosis, and we haven't thought about actually the state of the mental health of those doing the diagnosis. They're human beings. If they're under pressure, they can make mistakes. Their bias can kick in, and it can distort what's happening. How is that monitored to ensure that isn't taking place, that the diagnosis hasn't got any different biases? They're human beings. They've got their stresses, and when you're dealing with people who are mentally ill, that has to have a cumulative effect on your mental ill health.
Absolutely.
It's got to have. If you're dealing with people in trauma, there's got to be some sort of residuals trickling in that can sometimes make you blasé because it. Oh, I've seen this before, but it presents itself differently in different people, so you get it wrong. And also on your capacity to make a decision that's free of bias as possible as you can. And I'm not sure, I don't know, but I'm not sure that we have that system in place. And when I was a serving police officer, I was a custody sergeant. So I would be responsible for authorising the detention of individuals that are brought into custody. And that includes people detained under Section 136 of the Mental Health Act. And so you're detaining people so they get an assessment, so they get the right care. Personally, never thought it was. I don't think police station is the right place for someone who's having a mental health issue to be in. But there was nowhere else for people to go. And when you think about how long you can keep people in custody for that assessment, and you've got to get a couple of people into that just adds trauma to that individual as well, because of the environment not being, I know it's a place of safety, but
is it though?
Is it appropriate?
Is it though? Is it a place of safety, especially for our community where, I don't even need to go down the road of racism and institutionalization, but, is a police station a place of safety for our community? I really don't think it is.
Are any of these systems places of safety is the question.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very, very true. And it begs to differ how I know that there's been a lot of discussion about the mental health reform, but how these places of safety are even sourced out of this reform. Are they going to be new places of safety, or is it all going to be scrapped? Like these are real questions that when we're talking about reimagining the mental health system and resources and services, these are things that are important to us as a Black community. But Naomi, what's your thoughts on the statement of for us, by us, commission us?
Definitely. Just before I go there, I just want to go off the back of what something that Marcia said. And it's something I'm very passionate about, because I mean, no one when it comes to very to indigenous spiritual practices, especially if you're operating on a high level, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a priest, whatever it is that you are, but even with that, there's certain levels and certain things that happen.
That's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation.
Tune in for next week.
But there's supposed to be a level of like, no one asks the question, why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you coming into psychology? Why do you want to be a psychologist? Why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to be a psychiatrist? And no one, and this may seem very invasive for people, but this is actually important, because what is the like, what is it that makes you want to not only get into the system? Because there is a thing of wanting to judge people based on the experiences that you've had yourself, but there's no processing of that. There's no evaluation of that. There's no exploration of your mental health conditions, your shadows, your dark influences. So when you see it actually in front of you, you may totally disassociate from your own darkness and then pathologize someone else's. And that's where I have a problem. Because this is why I talk about humanizing all of us, whether you're a professional, whether you're a patient, whether you're a service user, whatever. We all go through mental health. We've all had aspects of trauma. We've all had something that we've had to transmute and navigate through. So if we can learn to have a bit more of a compassionate approach, not just see someone who's being aggressive or how you identify as aggressive and be like, that person's a threat to me. They may not actually be a threat to you. They might just be expressing themselves and you're only seeing that as aggression because of your previous experiences. You may have had someone like that who was aggressive to you, but that doesn't mean to me that person is going to be aggressive.
Yeah.
So there's no honesty, there's no transparency, there's no vulnerability. If you're dealing with vulnerable patients, you have to learn to be vulnerable too. And this is something that, especially a lot of spiritual practitioners, we're having to learn that. We're having to learn to embody that level of vulnerability where we can create that sacred space for someone to feel safe, for someone to feel comfortable and don't feel like they're being preyed upon. So yeah.
Girl. So powerful stuff, honestly. And I know you touched upon trauma, but I'm gonna circle back around to that a bit later, because there are a few things that I've spoken about both with you, Naomi, and with you, Marcia. So yeah, I didn't get your thoughts actually on the motto for us, by us, commission us.
So the motto is essential. Because how can you create solutions for someone that you don't even understand? You have no comprehension of their actual struggles. You have no comprehension of how that may make them express themselves. You have no understanding. You only have a pathology. You only have a box. You only have a limit. So let people, Black neurodivergence, let them come out and start telling their own experiences. Black people with mental health, let them start coming out and telling their own experience. Let them start creating their own programs, because this is the thing. If for myself, I've learned how to heal myself. There's so many things that has not been able to help me that I had to learn and go on a journey to learn what works for me. So let me share what I have. That may not be for everyone, but for the people like myself, you might find more engagement levels by introducing alternative approaches. What does Einstein say? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Absolutely.
So go to the people who actually have these experiences and that have actually found ways to navigate through these experiences and can share with the community. So yeah, commission us, like, because there's so many times that we're expected to just give information and not actually our value not be respected.
That's very true.
And our value being respected, because the whole education thing is a whole nother thing. And I know we spoke about that in terms of, feeling like there's this everlasting level we had to reach before we can be seen as qualified of our value. Like, I actually have something to share. Like that whole, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself.
That's another one.
I can see we're gonna do a few shows together.
A whole other conversation about how we stress ourselves out. There's narratives that are told us from young about we have to do this, do that, and then sometimes the reality, it doesn't matter how good we are, we will never be viewed as being good enough. Never. There are some people, doesn't matter how many degrees we've got, PhDs, how qualified we are, how much experience, we will never be good enough or competent because of who we are.
It's true. It's very true. Very, very true. And again, leads me nicely into the next question. So off the back of what you were saying, Naomi, about, new ways of utilizing the knowledge of people that have gone through these experiences, as a Black community, how can we embrace new integrative approaches to support ourselves through a range of mental health therapies from a Western society that doesn't really understand us or know us? So I'll throw that back to you, Naomi, and then Marcia, feel free to chip in with that as well.
First, I would say is there's a whole load of deprogramming and decolonialization that needs to take place, because we only see mental health from a Western standpoint. So we demonize each other. We use the same, weapons in this system against each other. You're crazy. You're this. You're that. Rather than actually taking more time to actually sit down and understand why is that the case. In fact, like, the compassion is the compassion for each other. It's the compassion for understand. And the reason why we don't have compassion is because a lot of us disassociate from our trauma. So then we actually create this elusive, perfected state that doesn't exist, because you've forgotten where you came from. You forgot your childhood. You forgot it wasn't pretty, and there's still a lot of stuff buried in your sack that hasn't been addressed. So, there has to be a lot of deprogramming and accepting that even that people do express themselves in different ways, because we use this same kind of neurotypical approach to box people in and be like, this is the only thing that's normal, and if it's not that, you are not normal. We have to break all of these stigmas within ourselves. We need to make it okay, normalize the fact that mental experiences, emotional experiences are a spectrum. So there may be a time where you get to that very dark dip, and there may be times when you get in the middle, and there may be times when you get to the top. That's normal.
But I have some, and I'm not challenging anything you say, but I've always had some real concerns about some words we use. What the hell does normal look like and sound like and feel like? Because my normal, it will be different to your normal.
Exactly.
It will be different to your normal. What is that? Number two, as children, we are told as children, be seen and not heard. Something wrong with you.
Minimize.
Stop crying. It's only this. It's only that. We are indoctrinated from babies to not speak up about things that happen. We're indoctrinated. And therefore, when it comes to adults, you've got sacks on your back of carrying stuff that you've buried, shut out, haven't looked at, don't talk about, even to yourself, don't want to face. And when you start to unpack that, what does my wife call it? Because she does some work. She went, your neglected house or something. You've got all these rooms that, forget the term she used. And I totally got that. You know, there's things that I know have happened to me. I can't remember because I'm sure, because there's trauma of it, you block out. You don't want to go there. But to unpack on that, all that, you've got to relive all that. You've got to face it. And that's hard, and people don't want to do it. So ignore it, bury it, bottle it up. Don't do anything about it until it hits you like a ton of bricks. And then you've got all that weight wade through and sort through.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's a bit like not answering your post, isn't it? Because you might have a bad bill, or you don't want to open the credit card bill because you know you take the envelope, you stick it in the drawer, you take the envelope, you stick it in the drawer. But you know the day's going to come, you're going to have to open all those envelopes, and it's going to be far worse than if you dealt with it in the first place. So our children have been indoctrinated not to share when things aren't right with us.
Yeah.
So is it any wonder that as adults, we're totally screwed?
It's very right.
Well, I think that's especially for our community. When I look at my parents and grandparents, and I look at their experiences that they had to go through on a very real, tangible level, and you know, the very, like, even first coming to this country and then having to assimilate into this culture just to protect yourself. It's not, some people, we demonize the assimilation, but we don't understand the trauma surrounding that.
Yeah. But it goes further than that, because our parents, or certainly my parents, so I can talk about my parents, they came over here in the late 50s. I was born here. They were brought up in Jamaica. They were educated by the English, all the rest of it. So you come to an environment where you're different for the first time.
Yeah.
You're told, come to the motherland, come and help us. We want you. And when you get here, they're telling you, no Irish, no dogs, no wogs, no black. Really? And you're not going to be traumatized? And people are saying, get over it. It happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's got to, that the shock of that must be unreal, because you're told you're part of the British Empire, you're one of us, but when you get here, you're not one of us.
Yeah. Or you can't be who you are in order to be here.
You can't go into places, you can't get housing, you can't get the jobs that you thought you were going to get. You have to live in, I mean, that cumulative effect has got to have an impact. So you shut it out because you've got to get through life. You've got to survive. You're not even thriving.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I think in regards to what you've both said, especially relating it to, new approaches that need to be looked into, you've both mentioned trauma and unpacking. So some of the things that we've both spoken about is trauma-informed care and getting to the root cause of people's issues, specifically when dealing with mental health issues, let alone people that aren't going through some sort of emotional or mental distress and need to be sectioned or medicalized or whatever it may be that they need. So what place do you see trauma support, trauma-informed care in this reimagining of mental health services and tools and resources?
So I would also add trauma responsive to that too, because there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of information about trauma, but nothing to counteract that. It often doesn't include the transformational practices that creates change, rather than encourages the same cycle of, oh my gosh, this is happening, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get out of this. Okay, how do we move forward, right?
Yeah.
That's where, some of the transformational and the transcendent and the transpersonal practices can become more beneficial in those integrations. And so the future of mental health is not just one way fits all.
Of course.
Because as we were talking about earlier, we all are diverse. Our experiences of normal are all different to each and every single one of us. So there's an approach that needs to meet for each and every individual. And in today, I get excited when I see all of these alternative different options of care, quantum healing, CBT, EFT. There's so many different spans of practices. Even I say this all the time, even with death doulas. That was many people didn't even know that you could get support at the end of life.
Yeah.
That's actually a thing. That's actually care. Even
Yeah.
that birth doulas, that was something that came in a few years ago, right? So,
but that doulas are nothing new.
they're not exactly.
They're
new to the Western world.
New to the Western world, but not Africa.
Exactly.
And stuff. Nothing that's not new. So it just goes to show, emphasizing your point, that actually we have a health system that's white centric. We have diagnosis practices that are focused on white skins, white pathology, and not taking into account the nuances of the experiences of black people. And we know that because the research has shown that in terms of in treating stuff. You look at medical books and they talk about that. It's no different when it comes to mental health.
Yeah. And in addition to that as well, with the nuances is, for example, as Black women, we could go out in the park and put on some soca and dance and just get ourselves in a vibe. And that's therapy.
Yes.
That's therapy.
And we'd be looked at there's something wrong with us. I know when I've walked into a shop years ago with my children, the music's been going and I've gone, and again, Mom, don't do that. Everybody's looking. And you're thinking, you should be able to, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just enjoying the music in the moment. But even the children are going, no, they're all looking at you and they think there's something wrong with you. And I'm just like, I'm in a good mood. I'm feeling the music.
It's true. Because you think, like, when you see people singing or dancing on the street and everyone else is, focus, head down, usually headphones in, but they're not vibing the way that we vibe. It's like people look at them like, why are you doing that? It's not a social norm to be expressive in public. And that's where I feel like, even like you see me, I'm moving my hands. I'm naturally expressive in that way. And I think us as a people, we are naturally expressive in many, many ways. So that's going to lead me into my next question. There's been a lot around social prescribing. Social prescribing is just literally being able to access certain facets of the community, of society, that can help with your physical and mental health. Now, there's been a bridge between central services, like central health services, and community services. Now, off the back of what you've both just said about dancing, movement, alternative types of therapies, where do you think the most support for these types of programs on prescription can be? Because in my eyes, it can be in the arts, it can be in the dances, it can be in the music and the drummings, and that, like, that's my own opinion. But I'm going to throw it over to you, Naomi. Let's go with you.
No, I totally agree. And that's my background. In fact, as a creative, I came more into mental health and spiritual health and transformational health because of just my whole creative experience and everything that I was doing within the arts. And especially I come from a Christian background as well. I'm no longer Christian, but just the whole thing of the music and the environments that we would create, and if you really take away all of the kind of the dogmas surrounding everything, what you're doing is creating a communal space that can receive an inspirational message that sparks them up for the week, right? And these are ways that the community have been tapping into therapy for you know, for however long. But it's about really investing in these ways. Like one of the projects that I used to do was I used to go into Pru's schools and prisons, and this is I found the most impact in these prisons when I would go into them, and I would deliver these creative arts workshops where we'll be going through creative writing, and we'll go and look at their experiences and what led up to their imprisonment. And what we'll be doing is literally unpacking a lot of that trauma, but through creative ways. So they didn't even have to dig that deep. They could find the transformative. That's what I meant about the trauma responsive. Like they found ways to find different responses to things that they had experienced, and that created new potentials and opportunities in their mind that now creates new opportunities in their reality. Like that's a very, very real thing. So I found very great results with creative practice, both in my own personal journey and in my personal practice. So yeah, I would put that there.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know. I remember when my mum was a nurse, and there was all sorts of activities they do with the patients, from painting to doing jigsaw puzzles and all the rest of it. And so within those establishments, they did value creative expression to help with mental health, and sometimes to keep people calm as a way of expressing. But when we did the whole care in the community, that went
out the window.
It went out the window. It was about medication.
Yeah.
It was about a different kind of management. I don't even call it management. All you've just done is relocated people from one place to another without putting adequate support and infrastructure for them. And think about the trauma yet again for people who have been in an institution for a long time, where it's safe, and they know where they are, and they've got a structure and a routine and people around them, and then out they go. And if we just think about what we've all been through with the pandemic, and COVID, and the impact, and that's another story, because we know that this whole thing's got legs. I mean, this is that it's going to have a real impact on young people as well. So you think about what we've all experienced, about that isolation of not being to interact with other people, and all the people that you know, and the environment that you know, and the nurses and the fellow patients that you know, and you're gone, oh, out you go, out you go. Literally, out you go.
This is, and I find it so strange because and I'm going to just bring a very brief story into this, but I worked at a program. It was a music and arts therapy program in North London in Hornsey, and this one was specific to outpatients that were going through a step down process to re-enter into the community. That was probably one of the most authentic and impactful forms of rehabilitation, because I know we mentioned that before, but that I've seen and felt, and that I was a part of throughout my whole career within mental health. And it made me start researching other services and programs that offer same or similar services. And I kid you not, there's only one that I've really found, and that's in SLAM, South London Maudsley Hospital, where they provide a range of different services. But again, I think that's mainly because South London, as you both know, is very heavily Black populated. But I know that they do certain therapies like the Tree of Life, and that's a South African practice developed by a South African woman. And I think personally, a lot of work around bringing practices from, other countries that where we originate from would be the best investment that the NHS or the government, where whoever is going to be investing, can make to support us as most marginalized, most vulnerable people that are the most populated within these services.
The key with that is them to invest in them coming over and them not going there to learn the systems and teach it
steal it.
themselves.
Yes.
Because the cultural appropriation when it comes to these, indigenous practices is wild. So start commissioning the people who actually have these practices in a very authentic way and bring them over.
Yep. Like I said, for us, by us, commission us. It's very, very true. So yeah, I'm gonna ask a very personal question, because I know you both have brought in a lot of your personal experiences, but I know we've spoken about whether you're happy to share a bit more about what life was like for you when you was going through your encounters and experiences with the mental health centers and services. So I'm going to throw this first of all to you, Marcia, and then I'll throw it back to you, Naomi.
On a personal level or a professional level?
However you want to share, my love. However you want to share.
I think on a personal level, my doctor, when I was serving, you just didn't talk about mental health issues. Certainly in the early stages of my career, there was a move later on for people to start to get support. And although I totally understand why people, particularly from the Black community, have their experience and their view of the police is not a positive one. I totally understand that. But I'd like to get them to consider that actually, as police officers, you don't actually deal with humanity at its best. I just want people to pause and think about how the cumulative effect that has on you when you're dealing with cot deaths, suicides, murders, rapes, road traffic accidents. Just think about it. That, yeah, I know that's your job. You bought into that, but just think about the human beings and the cumulative effect that can have, and what support that you can have. And I remember, and I think I did share it, that when the Hillsborough disaster tragedy happened, the force I was serving with, were involved in the sort of investigation. They set up a room where those who attended the match were supposed to phone up and just say who they were, contact details, and where they sat in the stand. But that's not what happened. What happened was people then started to say what happened at the match, and we weren't prepared for that as call takers, and that had an impact. So the force started to really, I think that really got things going. Actually, we need to think about what the officers are dealing with and what support. But it's a cumulative effect. And then think about as a Black officer joining the police, right? just park that for a minute. 1981 just had the riots. Scarman writes this report. It says we should have a more representative police service, yeah. And so some of us went, yeah, buy into that. You need to be in there to help to make a change. I bought into that, yeah. Was going to be a nurse, changed, joined the police 6 weeks before my 20th birthday. They weren't prepared for us. And the Black community didn't want us, who we were working for the police, either. Just imagine the pressure and the stress, a stressful job, and not feeling like anybody wants you and you belong and all the rest of it. So that's kind of where, from a personal perspective, where that made me start to, I think, suffer with my mental health, and then having children as well. I suffered with postnatal depression, and more recently during COVID, my father died, and that was a whole other thing as well. And that's not easy to say, because you're strong people, you're admitting your vulnerability. People don't like admitting their vulnerability. None of us do. because we're frightened that some people will take advantage of that or see us as less than. And as Black people, we're already viewed as less than, and we don't want to give people any more to think of us as less than. It's just another thing that people can judge us for, being weak, not being strong enough. Pull yourself together. You know, I remember someone saying to me, well, pull yourself together. Really? Do you think I like feeling like this? Do you really think it was my choice today to feel like I'm in a black hole and to feel this crap? This was not a choice.
Yeah. And I think, you know, there's so much strength in vulnerability that it takes a strong person to lower your defenses in order to be able to, you know, tap into those intricacies of self. And I guess a lot of what you've explained, and thank you for sharing your story, by the way, is, you know, I think I can't remember who mentioned it earlier on, but I think it was you, Naomi, where you mentioned about how we judge and how we criticize our own communities first before, and how we need to kind of change that mentality of just blaming and victimizing ourselves as a community. And yeah, that definitely needs to change. But thank you very much, Marcia, for sharing, and I appreciate you if no one has told you today.
Thank you.
Naomi, would you like to share anything with us?
Yeah, so my experience, well, my personal experience with mental health, I started having struggling with depression from the age of 12. Um, and but connecting it to the professional, the system, I found it very hard to engage with systems at that time with CAMS. I was in CAMS. But I found it very hard to engage because I knew I needed assistance, but I didn't have anyone I felt comfortable to speak to or that I could even relate to. And at that time, you know, undiagnosed and autistic, I was very nonverbal, and they couldn't understand why I was so nonverbal in these experiences, and I couldn't even express why that was happening either. I also had a lot of PTSD, as I had a whole lifetime of traumatic experiences, and for a long time, I was trapped in that, you know, those memories. And that actually created a physical illness for myself in fibromyalgia, chronic pain syndrome. And so it was from understanding what my illness did to me, made me go deeper into understanding trauma and how it impacts us on such a multidimensional level. And this is why I actually do what I do, because, you know, if we could understand the deeper patterns, the deeper influences that often gets missed because we don't have the reference point of understanding, like, we can actually remedy these things a lot better. And I will say, even as a practitioner, I do have my days where I'll have my off day and I'll have my on days, but that's normal. And this is what I mean about humanizing our experiences with our mind, right? Our minds is one of the biggest things that is probably one of the hardest things to navigate. And I wouldn't even say control, because it's not even, society teaches us to control our mind, but just learning how to flow with our mind. And so if we can actually just re-educate ourselves and our experiences, which is something I've had to really learn how to do. I've had to really just shed everything I've been taught about myself and really learn it from an internal perspective. My healing journey is what helps me to understand the mind, even go into the science. My healing journey helps me to do my work better. And I think if we can actually, even as practitioners, as professionals, if we could understand from that perspective, our health allows us to do our work a lot more better. So that's one of the things that I've had to learn in my experience. And just, continuing to just humanize this whole experience. Like, none of us are perfect. None of us are, these gods in real time. Like, we are, we're human and we have divinity, but we're just learning how to flow between the two at the same time. So that's what I would say.
Powerful. Powerful. Oh, you're making me feel all warm. Thank you both for sharing, honestly, because it makes you think about your own life, you know. And I'm sitting here reflecting, and I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of times when I could have asked for help, or there's been times where, yeah, it's not about me. The show isn't about me, but I appreciate you both sharing. And you know, Marcia, you touched upon how things were when you was in the force, and Naomi, you've spoke a lot about neurodiversity. And something that I have noticed, there's been a lot of reoccurring discussions around, you know, these disparities for people that either are discriminated against or have regular police contact or are neurodivergent. And my question is, yes, the data's been there this whole time. So these discussions are coming around again, but is it too little too late, or is it the right time? Why now? Why not before? I'll go with Marcia first.
That's a big question.
It is, because you got to think of it. We're in 2022 now.
It's a big question, but you know what? Who does it matter to? Because if it matters to you, and I include the Black community in this, there's no get out of jail card. Pardon the pun. If it matters to you, you will do something about it.
Yeah.
Like my mum used to say, who feels it knows it. Well, a lot of us have felt it and we know it, but we're not doing anything about it. It's like it's somebody else's responsibility. And it can't be. We have to take responsibility for ourselves as individuals and as a community and be accountable for that, because nobody's going to do it for us. That's fact. You know, history has shown for change to happen, it's the people it affects who have got up and done something about it. Yes. History's shown that. Change has happened because people have gone enough. And I'm saying, when's it going to be enough now? Enough. Yeah. We need to do something about it. We need to galvanize ourselves. We need to be more vocal. And vocal doesn't mean aggressive. For anybody who's listening thinking, oh, Black women being aggressive, doesn't mean being aggressive. It means being vocal and saying, actually, this isn't working for us. And we've given you enough time to make the change. And now we need the change because it's enough. It's the 21st century and we're still talking about this, and I won't swear. We're still talking about this and it ain't happening. You know, I was looking at the figures. So, for example, when it comes to the Black community, and I looked at the government website, they published a report on the 23rd of June this year. And it said, in the year to March 2021, Black people were almost 5 times as likely as white people to be detained under the Mental Health Act. That's 344 detentions per 100,000 people, compared with 75.
But yet we don't even make up, 4% of the population?
So what's going on? Nobody's asking the question. What's going on? We're just going, oh, yeah, the figures again. Oh, yeah, the figures. Why? What's happening? Are we more liable to have mental health issues than any other part of the population? Are we? And where's the evidence? And why is that? And what we're going to do about it? Because there is an impact on society and the mental health and the community on the individual. So does it really matter? And if it was all about money and resources, trust me, something would be better. Something would be done. So why is nothing being done? And so we do have to stand up for ourselves. We can't keep having reports churned out about all these things about the experience of Black people, especially around mental health. And we're sitting back saying, yeah, another report. Yeah, another report. Yeah, another report. Yeah. No surprises. If we get to a point where we're going, no surprises, and we're getting to the point where we've been saying for a while, oh, that's no surprise. really? Should we be sitting back and just going, oh, well,
Accepting.
yeah, acquiescing? This is the norm. This isn't right. If this is the norm, this isn't right.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree. Naomi, would you like to chime in on this question?
See, it's a hard one for me. And I totally agree with everything that Marcia just said. I guess my heart feels heavy for the other side, the actual reality of those people who've had to endure these types of experiences and not be heard at all. Where you ask, is it a little too late? The reality is those that were, a lot of undiagnosed autistics, there's trauma there that you cannot even compensate for. It's those that have been unlawfully detained, there's trauma there that you just can't even compensate for. We can do all the change and there can be little changes that's coming in, but the reality is there's people that have, that will have those imprints, and what are even the epigenetic influences of that? We've already been seeing cycles of, epigenetics and all that kind of stuff, but I think this situation has to be looked at from a holistic perspective, because even with, as Marcia was saying, people can see the reports but they don't feel the experience. If you felt the experience, you would do something. You'd be trying to scream from the top of your head, but what happens is, even with people like myself, when I go out, even I've started sharing on TikTok my story, and then I'll have comments where people are like, that couldn't have taken place. You could have not been unlawfully, like they would have had to I'm telling you, that didn't take place. The problem is, why is it so hard for you to understand that these things do happen? Even when it comes to the Black community, when this first thing happened, people actually thought I was crazy. There was no support in, maybe this could have been it. Why? Because they believe the system.
Yeah.
They trust the system, and they don't trust the voices of those that are actually going through these experiences. So we end up gaslighting our own community.
Yeah.
So there's so many layers of issues that has to be addressed. They can't be avoided because they all tie into each other. But the moment that we begin to become more comfortable with seeing things from an objective standpoint and seeing the whole picture zoomed out without only being subjective in our own, because this is the thing, sometimes if it doesn't affect us, we don't really care. If it doesn't come to your door, why do I need to worry about it? The point is, as Marcia just said, the levels of the increase of people over the last few years, there's been a 40% increase of people that Black people that have been detained. 40%, right? So we can't deny that this is not taking place. If I can reference in my real-time experience, that feels right, because there's been people that I know that's been sectioned and been like, hold on, how did that happen? It doesn't mean to say that they may not have mental health struggles, but a mental health struggle and an illness is two different things. And this is what I mean about decolonialization.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, you've touched on a lot of truth, and yeah, I'm not even going to add to it. You've both said it all, in all honesty. And I think, if we start looking towards, okay, the data's there, what are we going to do about it? And I think that's where we can look at present and future interventions and practices. So my next question to you both is, let's talk about some medical interventions that have been floating around in the ether. Something I've been researching a bit about is like psilocybin, or even just other natural substances that can support with getting to those root traumas and those, actual causations rather than the plaster that we've been talking about. And I've been seeing that there's a lot of legalization. So it's shifting away from the criminalization of mental health and, the use of certain drugs or chemical compounds, that, in all honesty, particularly like psilocybin is magic mushrooms as we know it, or stuff like nutmeg, cactus, all these kind of natural remedies. These are things that have been used within our Eastern cultures anyway. So what's your thoughts on Western societies legalizing these substances for the betterment of, a range of different mental health conditions?
Okay, I'm going to start it. I first of all, and it's my bias in some ways. First of all, in terms of drugs, and I've got a thing about taking medication. I only take it if it's absolutely necessary. First of all, even if I got a migraine, I will try and work on the migraine so I don't have to resort to medication. It's the first thing. We also know that research has shown that some people have a predisposition to being to addiction.
Yeah,
that's my other that's my other concern with it. Second of all, we already know as a Black community, if you take certain drugs, you've got a label, right? A label that if a white person took the drug wouldn't have. So I see medication necessarily that can be a temporary, like stitches. But I do agree with Naomi about working on self to be able to manage. Yeah. So for me, the whole drug thing and all these drugs coming out again, I just think, what are we setting ourselves up for in 10 or 20 or 30 years time? What is going to be the consequences of doing that? Because it's expedient, because it's a quick fix. Quick fixes don't help in the long term. They just cause another problem to fix.
But then the flip side to that is a lot of the current medication, you see people aren't getting the effects that, one, they need, but two, there's so many different side effects, and three, they're on them for lifetimes, many decades, in fact. And these new interventions that are being considered, whilst you couldn't consider them as quick fixes, but I would prefer, like I can even reference like family members that have, treatment resistant schizophrenia, for example, and they've been on medication for 30-40 years, whereas going through a particular treatment plan that is coupled with, a specific type of therapy that encompasses, acceptance and commitment therapy, stuff like that, that people are seeing real results within a year, 2 years, where they're
and I can understand that approach if there's a plan, not here's something to take off you go. And also there's the other thing about accessibility and availability of these medication, because there's a problem getting medication and the cost of it. You know, who pays for it? It's not cheap. Even if you've got an NHS prescription, it's not cheap.
That's true. That's very true.
And so Naomi, you can't afford, sometimes you can't afford to be ill. You can't afford to be ill because you can't afford to be ill.
Literally, you can't afford to be well either.
Yeah.
It's true. It's very true. Naomi, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I actually agree with Marcia. That, I mean, I understand that, and the thing is again, it's not one size fits all. For some people, psychedelics can be a beneficial experience, but I also agree with exactly the same research that says for pharmaceuticals is that it should actually only be used in small doses. My issue is that there's a lot more attention over just drugs, whether it's psychedelic or whether it's pharmaceutical. There's a lot more attention over drugs as opposed to actually understanding the power that we have within. For example, mentalism. There's not many mentalist teachings that teaches you how to tap into the power of your brain or really understand the power of your subconscious mind. If we could have because these not all spiritually induced experiences are psychedelic induced.
Yeah.
Like myself, mine was a naturally induced experience. So it doesn't give space, because what it does is it still creates a demonization for those that actually do express these qualities naturally, because it's either you have it on a drug, or if it's not, then this must be schizophrenia, this must be bipolar, so it's like it's almost like when they say legalization, I feel triggered because it feels like a trap all over again, because it's like, hold on, number one, who gives you the right to tell anyone what's legal and what's not? Like, the very fact that the Western society, like, even if you've got a society that's a multicultural society, right? But you can dictate what's legal, even though there's other people that come from other societies that you've called over. You allow them to come over, but you're not inclusive of their culture. Their culture can stay outside. And
why do you want to embrace these now? Because they're not
and that's
new.
the question.
So why now? Why? Because there's some commercial benefit.
Yep. Yeah.
It's almost like from cigarettes to vape. It's the same thing, just upgraded and more digital.
Yeah. I hear you both. And I think, off the back of where you just mentioned about digital, looking at non-clinical interventions such as the incorporation of gamification and VR worlds and all those kind of things. I've been seeing a lot of research around that as well, where people are using immersive experiences, I guess somewhat natural, but in a virtual world, to explore the depths of their hidden traumas and their triggers and things like that as well. I was looking at a study from Cambridge University where someone has developed a new game. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but basically being able to confront your fears in a virtual experience and then kind of going through a graded exposure of that over time to then facilitate how you respond and react in the real world. But yeah, what's your thoughts around those kind of non-clinical?
And who's designed it, and from whose perspective, and who does it work for?
Exactly.
And we already know that people can get addicted to smartphones, apps, I mean, please, spare me.
My issue would be, and I'm with you, Marcia, because I mean, number one, again, it's the same thing as the psychedelics, because, okay, let me put it like this. Psychedelics in indigenous cultures is not even something that is used as a drug. It's used as an activator, which means you probably only need it one time, and after that you learn how to be able to tap in yourself. So what this is doing is actually it's disassociating people from themselves and allowing them to experience life outside of themselves as opposed to within themselves. Because those same transmutation experiences, you can do that within yourself and you'll have a lot more impact. But what happens is when you create a virtual experience, someone's projecting their ideas into that experience. You didn't create that yourself.
No.
That's not your own immersive experience. That's someone else's creation over that experience. And I feel like, again, my problem is that their approach, their mindset, once you already have a capitalistic mindset, a mindset that's here to harvest, a mindset that's here to, destroy, and all of that like that's all that's going to be created from that. This is why I say the foundation of the system with the people that's creating it It doesn't work like that. So they take little parts of indigenous culture, indigenous spiritual experiences, and then they try to mix it into their own. And it's like, no, you've actually now tainted the pureness of this experience.
So when they've done these programs, included in that program is weaning you off that program. I bet it isn't. I bet it isn't.
Well, I know that
becoming attached to your go-to place for that. Totally agree with Naomi. If you do meditation, and I've done meditation, tried. I think I'm pretty awful at it, because every time I've tried over the years, I tend to fall asleep. So maybe that's my natural state, just zonk out, Mars. But that's a false sense of what works for you that's been imposed on you. You haven't created that. You haven't figured out what works for you. You've just accepted that. What happens when it doesn't work any longer? Because you become used to it and it no longer works. Then what do you move to?
You become addicted to virtual reality. Now you can't live in reality because you're addicted to the virtual experience.
And it isn't cheap either. It might be cheap initially. You might get a trial for a bit, and then you're in there, and there's a cost. There's another cost. If you learn for yourself, the costs are minimal. It's something that you can do just as long as you can be signposted, and the costs will vary. But things like that, oh, great, for a moment. But it's not solving the issue. It's just masking it.
Sure, and especially when interventions like these get popularized, price goes up because the demand goes up. So yeah, I do agree with a lot of what you said. But as we are in a digital renaissance, I guess these things are being considered in large clinical trials. So I guess we've just got to see how these things are rolled out, whether it's new reformed medications or non-clinical interventions. Most I can say is watch this.
I was going to say, what if you haven't got access to digital platforms? What if you haven't got a mobile phone, a laptop, because you can't afford it? We already seen what's happened with older people with things all online now, and they don't know how to use it. We already seen what happened during the pandemic with children, young people being taught online, but some haven't got a laptop in their homes, or they might have a mobile phone, and there's a family of 6 and somebody's got to work, and there's children that got to do schooling, and the government was supposed to provide schools with laptops to help those children continue with the learning, and how that worked out. So put everything on. So for some people it's accessible, for some people it's a barrier. So once again, there's inequitable, unaccessible for people who need the service. We need to make it simpler.
I think, and you've touched on a really good point in regards to digital exclusion, because even in my line of work within D&I, there's been a lot of highlighted inequities, but also talk around level playing fields, but the action behind it is very limited. And when it comes to I would say an aging population, because this is where we're living at, an aging population globally is very much something that needs to be considered throughout this new wave of, or new way of living, I should say. Whether it is they consider having hubs of these virtual experiences, or however they decide to roll it out, I don't know. I was just looking at some of the very early research and clinical trials, and the most I can say is we're just going to have to wait and see.
But even in parts of the UK, internet connectivity is poor. Geography. So how is that going to work when we haven't got the infrastructure to support that for everyone? We're just widening the
disparities.
And those. It's just a different way. We've just moved the goalpost.
It's
You're very
priorities.
right.
The simpler approaches they could have that could actually cost a lot less, but they skip all of that to go to go into space world,
Because it's
futuristic
all about
world.
the contracts, all about who's winning the contracts and who can fund these things, you know. But
And what do they look like, and who are they?
Mm.
you're asking me questions I don't know, Marcia.
Well, you only have to look at the IT world.
It's true. It's very
Mm,
whitewashed, but you know,
mm.
I believe in big black tech
We already know
pushing
about.
through.
I'll give you an experience of AI and digital. So during after we've just had that lovely pandemic, go to a restaurant. It's got one of these machines. It takes your temperature at the time. Takes your temperature. You put some hand sanitizer on, and it tells you to go through. So I was wearing a mask because you had to wear a mask at the time, and I had a black Adidas. No advertisement really, but I was wearing a black mask. The mask told me that it took my temperature, and it told me to put a mask on. And my wife looked at me, his wife, and said, "Did that just tell you to put a mask on?" I said, "Yeah." Who invented that machine? Because look at me, I am not black like the face mask was, jet black. But the machine said to me, "Put a face mask on." So who developed that and didn't take into skin tone? The same people will develop some of these different treatments. Who's having an input to make sure that actually it covers a wide perspective and it doesn't discriminate and disadvantage? Who?
These are very real questions. So anyone that's listening and watching this show, please get in touch and give us some answers. That would be very, very welcomed. But what I will say, ladies, it has been an amazing show so far, and I could talk to you both for hours. But unfortunately, we don't have the time. But I know that we are going to be revisiting a lot of these subjects soon. But before we go, could you please, 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 please let everyone know where they can find you, what your next upcoming projects are? And this is to Naomi first.
So I phoenix.co.uk. Can you hear me? Oh, I don't
Your
know. Am I still there?
internet's gone a little bit. Repeat that again, just
Okay,
in
am I back?
case anyone missed it.
Okay, so yeah, you can find me on my websites, houseofphoenix.co.uk or phoenixpriestess.co.uk, and you can also find those same Phoenix Priestess 888 and House of Phoenix UK on Instagram. What is coming up for me? I actually have some new workshops and masterclasses that I'm releasing. I started a mindset mastery program, which is a program that integrates affirmative meditation, subconscious programming, and shadow work, which is just exploring past traumas and internal experiences. So I have the second part of that program that I'll be releasing in the next 2 months. So I have that, and I also have a program called Shadow Work for Practitioners that will be coming up, and I'll be doing a lot more work in just exploring our own personal biases when we're dealing with patients. So yeah, that's all about me and where you can find me.
Amazing. Thank you. And Marcia, where can people find you? What's your upcoming projects?
Well, they can find me on marciaorconsultancy.com. Keep it simple. I've got dipping my toes into all sorts of things. I'm going to be running a workshop for the Housing Diversity Network in Birmingham in October. I'm writing my book, something that I've been prompted to do over about 15 years and never got round to it. So this is the time to write it. And I'm just looking at doing some more activist work, charity, voluntary work, but also supporting organizations and teams in being a more diverse, inclusive and equitable across the board. And in fact, I prefer to say inclusive first, because diversity first doesn't work. You need to be inclusive of everyone. You need to make it a safe space for everyone and make it equitable. And then from that, you will get diversity. But we've been doing it the other way around, focusing on the numbers, not on the experience, and it doesn't work. So lots going on. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at Marcia or 62. And as I've said, my website as well.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. So anyone that is in need of some D&I support, some shadow work, I know Naomi didn't mention it, but she is also a 2-time author. If you need a shadow workbook or a transformational workbook, hit her up on her website as well. But what I will say, it has been phenomenal. I think that's probably the only word that comes to mind when thinking about this whole there you go, transformational workbook. But yeah, it's been a phenomenal show. And what I will say is we will have both Marcia and Naomi back next week when we will be discussing the emotional and spiritual impacts on chronic physical health and mental health as well. So if you're interested in hearing from these two lovely ladies, make sure you come back next week. What I will say for now is goodbye, good evening, good night, good morning, whatever time you're listening and watching to this. This is Rhyana from Black Mental Health Matters. Take care. Okay. Ending. Is it ended? Doesn't want to end for us, clearly. The show was that good.